One of the mantras was creating a combat puzzle for the player. And so a lot of resources and time is required, from the NPC team, but also from the level design team and the game design team to create this scalable combat puzzle that is fun from level 1 through to 30 and continues to be fun as the players are trying to optimize their gear.
Tom Clancy's The Division 2 brings the war to Washington D.C, as the United States is still caught in the grip of the green poison outbreak 6 months after the fight to reclaim New York City. Massive Entertainment returned with a larger and more ambitious title, with a variety of new gameplay features that reshaped how players interact with both friendly and enemy AI characters within the game. I'm Tommy Thompson, and welcome to AI in Games. To better understand the challenges faced and what the development team wanted to achieve, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Philip Dunstan, the lead AI programmer for Tom Clancy's Division 2, whose team not only collaborate heavily with the AI and gameplay design teams within Massive, but with other programmers and designers at sister studios throughout Ubisoft. I wanted to find out about the lessons learned from shipping and maintaining the first Division, the team's goals as they moved into production on the sequel, and the changes laced throughout the game's AI systems to build a fun and nuanced combat puzzle, keeping the player engaged from the very first encounter all the way to endgame. Tom Clancy's The Division, like many a live service game, was an exercise in growth as the project not only made it to store shelves in March of 2016, but also was maintained and updated for a period just shy of 2 years post-launch, with the West Side Pier Update 1.8 released in December 2017. The core AI behaviour of The Division is built through a proprietary behaviour tree system, a topic I've previously covered in episodes 34 and 35 of the main AI in Games series, with significant effort put into tools to help the design and programming teams build behaviours and address inconsistencies and bugs within them.
When we started to look at what we were going to do for the Division 2, we took quite a while to look back at what had worked and what hadn't worked on Division 1, what we'd liked and what we thought needed changing. From an AI-specific point of view, that meant things like our core AI architecture, some of the core systems like the way we control, which NPCs are shooting at a time, how NPC aim works, NPC animation, and sort of the basic locomotion system. A lot of those systems we thought were working actually, really well, or with sort of small incremental improvements would be just perfect for the Division 2. And we also, the other thing we really liked from the Division 1 is that we had created a set of tools in Division 1 which we thought worked really well. So Division 1, of course, shipped with Snowdrop Engine, and with the Snowdrop Engine we own and build a lot of our tools ourselves. Division 1 was the driving game behind the Snowdrop Engine. And so we had created a set of tools in that engine for the way we edit behavior trees, the way we debug behavior trees, the way we show debug drawing on the screen, that we can use that for historical debugging. Those type of systems we really liked. It gave a lot of power to our content creators, our designers, our game designers, our level designers, and as programmers, we didn't have to be involved in a lot of the work that they wanted to create.
But while there's always a need for change, there's also a chance for growth and improvement. A new title, even a sequel in a franchise, is an opportunity for systems to be refreshed and iterated upon, addressing bugs in the toolchain and re-engineering existing solutions and systems to be more stable and reliable, with the navigation tools in particular an area that the AI team focused upon. But the biggest changes that players would notice was in the design and structure of the enemy archetypes and factions that players would face in Washington D.C. This was a focus not just for the main campaign, but more critically during endgame, where the most avid of Division players would spend the bulk of their time.
We knew we had wanted to solve this problem of replayability in endgame, and the endgame was one of our big design pillars for Division 2, is to make a game that would be more satisfying to play at endgame. So making sure that all our NPC factions were viable at endgame, that they were all fun to play against, and it didn't matter whether you were playing against the Black Tusk or the Hyenas, they would all be fun to play against. As part of that, we needed to increase the faction diversity, so to have more differentiation between the factions, so that throughout the game you felt the difference when you were playing from one faction compared to another faction. So when you were replaying missions, and when you're playing at endgame, that if you played a mission that had been invaded by the Black Tusk, then that was a very different experience than if you were playing a Hyena mission, for example. And then finally, we wanted to make some targeted changes to some areas of the game to provide, increase the amount of immersion. One of the things about the Division is that we are a grounded in the modern world type thing. We're not a sci-fi shooter, and it's one of the things I think that attracts players to our game is that they feel like they're playing in New York, or they feel like they're playing in Washington. And we wanted to sort of double down on that with creating a gameplay experience where the player felt immersed in the world, and that meant having NPCs that looked like they were immersed in the world.
To address the challenge in diversifying the enemy factions, the team focused on 3 key areas: improving the enemy's core behaviour and design, reducing their time to kill, but also overhauling their reactions to player behaviour and reinforcing the core combat puzzle that each enemy should present. Amplifying the differences between factions such that they appear more distinct, and taking the existing enemy archetypes and making them more distinct for each faction. This would help satisfy the team's goals of not just enemy diversity, but ensuring challenging gameplay during endgame. So let's walk through each of these in turn and explore the big changes happening under the hood. One of the biggest tasks the AI team set themselves was to amplify the player's impact on AI behaviour. Naturally, in a game like The Division, you interact with enemy AI primarily by shooting at them. But players need to feel rewarded when their persistence and skill enable them to clear a room of enemies. Communicating an AI's decisions is incredibly important for maintaining immersion for the player, and it's equally important in the heat of battle, as it is during quieter moments. In the first Division, the enemy's response to being shot was not as rewarding for the player as it could be. Division 2 embellishes the stagger animations for when a character is under fire, which help give your attacks meaning, but more critically increase the rate of falter animations that interrupt the AI's behaviour, giving you an opportunity to re-evaluate the situation. But having the AI character reacting to being shot is one thing, it's giving them a more natural reaction that enriches the experience. Hence they focus more on dodging and ducking enemy fire, forcing players to keep track of their movements, not just shooting fish in a barrel, but constantly re-evaluating target prioritization and maintaining an edge of uncertainty to the fight. The last major change to the core systems was the time to kill, the period of concentrated gunfire players need to maintain to take an enemy down. Given the pseudo-realistic setting of the Division, there's a need to balance this alongside the design of each character. The TTK of the Division 2 is on average much lower than the original, but the team still wanted to provide big meaty enemies that would require greater resilience and a bit of coordination to overcome.
It was reducing the time to kill for NPCs so that you didn't feel like you had to unload full clip into an NPC to kill it. And the ones that took longer, we used the destructible armor system to give a plausibility for them requiring to be shot at for extended lengths of time.
But there were still many an additional change aimed at improving the enemy immersion, both within combat and when idle in the world. Weak points based on equipment that enemies have equipped was pushed farther, while a new barking system reinforces the intensity of combat as characters not only shout among one another, but also at the player. The Division 2 has 3 main enemy factions that players face off against: the Hyenas, the Outcasts, and the True Sons. As players enter Washington D.C, each faction has taken up refuge in varying parts of the city and maintain numerous strongholds, forcing you to play against each faction throughout the campaign. However, once the player reaches level 30 and defeats the True Sun stronghold at the Capitol building, the 4th and final faction emerges, the Black Tusk. They become the game's main endgame opposition, recapturing strongholds and establishing their authority across the map. with many of the story mission locations now providing remixed variations that pit you against them. Ensuring each faction was not only distinct, but still proved valuable throughout endgame was a top priority for the development team. In fact, much of this was driven by the lessons learned when building the post-launch content for the first Division.
That was actually a problem that we hadn't foreseen when we launched the Division. We had created this campaign that showed us sort of the different factions as they get introduced. As you see, we'd ramped up from sort of Riker and Cleaner up to Last Man Battalion. They had, as part of as you saw them, that progression of the campaign, there was a progression of difficulty and a progression of complexity of the NPCs. And when we got to endgame, we found that the most enjoyable faction to play with in the endgame was the Last Man Battalion, that the Rikers and the Cleaners didn't really, at least initially, weren't able to match the high-level player in endgame. So we, from the very early part of our post-launch maintenance, we were looking at what we needed to do to bring those factions up to a higher level. So all through that post-launch period, we were trying to bring the factions up so that they were equally as viable in the end game as the Last Man Battalion was. And it was a shame really, because the Cleaners were actually one of the more interesting factions to play against, and yet they weren't as good to play against in the end game. But over time, and I think culminating in that Resistance release, we're able to at least bring them up to a close enough level that they were all viable together, and you could sort of balance them all together.
So with this in mind, the designers rebuilt the movement, positioning and combat parameters of each faction against 4 traits: aggression, organisation, training and tech. Each of these traits has numerous permutations, and it allows for each faction to be unique in its overall design, but still prove valuable for use in endgame. Aggressive factions such as the Hyenas and Outcasts are quick to reposition and advance towards the player. They prioritise circling the player at close range, but also have longer uninterrupted shooting patterns. Meanwhile, the True Sons and Black Tusk are defensive factions. They prefer to stay at an optimal distance, use short control bursts of gunfire, and relocate less frequently. This results in more chaotic and scrappy fights with aggressive factions, while defensive factions force a more drawn-out gun battle and spread themselves out to stay at range of the player. Next up, the True Sons and Black Tusk are Organised factions, meaning combat barks between AI reflect the hierarchy and order of the unit, plus their animations show a lot of non-verbal communication. Meanwhile, the Hyenas and Outcasts are Unorganised. They don't communicate as effectively or really consider what other characters are doing. The third faction design trait reflects the level of tactical and combat training the group has been given. Training reflects the overall combat performance of a given faction, including their use of cover fire, flanking maneuvers, time taken for wind-up attacks such as lobbing grenades, weapon accuracy, and the animation style. The animations are really important, given it communicates how quickly enemies can transition from one action to another, but the animation itself reinforces their training and effectiveness in achieving a given action. The training of a given faction is broken up into 3 groups. The Hyenas are the only untrained faction, which suits given they're the first ones you come across in DC. They don't use cover fire, rarely flank, have slow wind-up and poor accuracy. Meanwhile, the Outcasts and True Sons are trained factions. They fire from cover, flank more frequently, and have improved wind-up times and accuracy. Plus their animations imply they have a stronger grasp of what they're doing. This leaves the Black Tusk as the only highly trained faction, with much more aggressive flanking tactics, faster wind-up times, and even better gunfire accuracy. The last trait of a given faction is their use of tech. The use of melee weapons, standard guns, improvised explosives, and gadgets, all the way to robotic tanks. This is the one trait where the Hyenas aren't on the lowest setting. Outcasts run on the lowest tech trait, given they use melee weapons and homemade explosives, which largely fit their tribalistic nature. Meanwhile, the True Sons are medium tech, given their focus on traditional weaponry. The Hyenas are high tech. They carry shields, use remote control bombs, and even carry grenade launchers. Lastly, the Black Tusk has a very high tech trait, with the use of drones and mini-tanks. So with all of these traits in place, each faction provides a different experience. The focus isn't to make them clearly easier or harder to fight against, though it's clear that the likes of the Outcasts or Hyenas might be a little easier to get on top of versus the Black Tusk. But the traits provide a range of unique characteristics to each faction, providing diversity in enemy strategy without effectively making them too weak to be interesting. Now, the more seasoned Division 2 players might have listened to that last part and noticed an inconsistency. At the start of the game, the Hyenas attacking the White House don't fit the faction traits I just described. They fight more defensively, seem a little more organised, and have a modicum of training. You're right, they don't. It also isn't the only time that a faction doesn't necessarily line up with their selected traits. That's because they're one of the numerous hidden factions, special versions of a given faction that are used in very specific situations. Hidden factions are custom built by designers to provide a hidden tutorial in the game's combat. Tutorial factions are designed to teach you core gameplay mechanics. The hidden versions of each faction are used not only the first couple of times you meet them in the open world, but also in some of the opening missions of the game. Once the opening hours of the game are completed, these hidden factions are removed from the game and you play against the true versions of each faction for the remainder of your time.
In fact, a lot of the gameplay for Division and Division 2 is the player up against a group of NPCs, and it's that group of NPCs that each of them is sort of, compared to the player, is underpowered compared to the player, but together they combine to provide a good combat puzzle.
In my earlier videos on the Division, I talked about how each faction is comprised of numerous archetypes, specific enemy designs that have their own preferences or behaviours. These force the player to constantly evaluate target prioritization and minimising their exposure to attack as different enemy types change the flow of combat. Now, the archetypes have largely stayed consistent between games, but with some new additions based on new tech. There's the Rusher, Thrower, Assault, Controllers, Heavy, Sniper, Support, Tank, Leader, and the special archetypes for named bosses. But for Division 2, an effort was made to try and make each version of the same archetype play and behave slightly differently in each faction, providing both unique weaponry and more distinct AI behaviours. If you want to consider the Rusher, which runs directly at the player with the intent to attack you, the same archetype is quite distinct for both the Hyenas and the Outcasts, with the latter as a suicide bomber whose gas tank can be shot to eliminate them if you're fast enough. Meanwhile, the Sniper behaves differently for the Outcasts compared to the True Sons. The True Sons Sniper is a more traditional version of that archetype. It uses a marksman rifle, has a long wind-up, but deals heavy impact damage. However, the Outcast Sniper fires explosive arrows from a bow with a more pronounced wind-up time that also has an area of effect on impact. As players, we recognise the archetype, but on a faction-by-faction basis, we're now adapting our strategies accordingly.
As you said, we're creating a PvE game. I mean, the Dark Zone, is PvP, but it still has significant PvE elements in it. We're creating a PvE game. We're creating a looter shooter where the player needs to, experience a increase in power and potency in the world, but they need to be able to express that by feeling like they're getting better at shooting NPCs. So we need to create this scalable challenge for the player to play against.
Achieving diversity and novelty in the AI for games such as The Division can be a real challenge. There needs to be a level of consistency such that players can improve their skills. However, your enemy AI needs to keep up with the player as their mastery of the game increases, providing new challenges, forcing you into tight spots to fight your way out of, and helping maintain that balance of tension and enjoyment. The Division 2 is an impressive feat in that the programming and design teams took the lessons learned from the first game and went back to the drawing board to design new enemy AI characters, such that they would avoid making the same mistakes twice. Plus, with the release of the Warlords for New York expansion, which has players return to the island of Manhattan, we can now see these principles applied to some of the original factions, with the Rikers and Cleaners making their return to the franchise. But building the enemy factions is but one facet of how AI is applied in The Division 2. Looking beyond the need to shoot and kill, the world of Washington D.C. is one of rebirth. Painful process as the city rebuilds itself after months of conflict. How do you create a more dynamic city full of patrolling civilians, of convoys moving between checkpoints, and balancing it all without it turning into a chaotic mess? Well, I'll tell you all about that next time. Thanks for watching this video on AI in games. I'd like to give a special thanks to Ubisoft for the opportunity to work with them on this project, and of course to my patrons who crowdfund the AI in games series. Have fun folks, I'll be back.